Well, hello. This recording is starting after inadvertently it didn't, the record button didn't get started just as we had the introduction, and now I'm doing of Alison and myself as speakers today, and I'm doing a bit of an introduction. I'm not going to go back because what I was about to say is fine. You just, anybody who's seeing the recording, you didn't get my lead up. But the point, I was making a couple of points, but the number one point I wanted to make, and you're coming in perfect timing if you're on the recording, is that Ari Thoresen extended an offer to the audience of Chicago branch a few weeks ago. You can catch the recording on the Chicago branch website. He extended the offer to offer training to anyone who was interested and ready to make progress in the macrocosmic path. And I won't take any more time to repeat what I said earlier about that. You can go watch the video and catch, read what Rudolf Steiner says. But he explicitly, and he agreed and committed to come back to Chicago branch to take, he gave us exercises. In his last presentation, he gave us one particular exercise and some variations and some, as well as indications of things that we need to do, ideally daily, ideally for about 3 months, to be ready for what he's going to bring next. That was already a month ago. And we're on the cusp of the Holy Nights, coming into the new year. If you haven't started yet, if you knew about it and thought about it, but haven't started yet, but something is speaking to you to do this, I strongly encourage you to begin. And if this is the first time you're hearing it, it's not too late. 2 months daily is still plenty of time. And so I just want to strongly encourage you to consider that. At least go listen to the recording or listen to it again and see what the spiritual world might be saying on this cusp of the hidden holy night, what the spiritual world might say to you with regard to working with Ari and others of us around the world on this path. I wanted to follow up, though, a little bit more on on Ari's indications, because he, so for clarity, and I believe this is the audience that he spoke to, Chicago branch, so that I think this is an appropriate place for me to share this. Ari made a very specific distinction between the macrocosmic path and the microcosmic path, just as Rudolf Steiner does. And Ari was explicit that he is offering, that his progress has been primarily in the macrocosmic path, and that's what he's offering. He also, as I said earlier, indicated that the paths, that there are variations on the northern version of the macrocosmic path. He specifically mentioned some, gave an example of a difference in North America. And I just simply like to say that I can affirm that as well, because I'm one who's made progress from North America on the macrocosmic path. And so, and I have woven into my teachings have been things that I haven't described the macrocosmic path, but have been, for those who are ready to pick them up, have been indications with regard to that path. And I'm anticipating now that Ari has come forward to be able to offer, comments to in support of the work that he's doing on the macrocosmic path. But my work most explicitly has been on the microcosmic path. And Ari said some things about, the difficulty and the differences. He didn't get too detailed about the differences, but about the extra difficulties that come with the microcosmic path. And so for those of you who are aware of the work I've been doing that I've offered in the past on guidance and esoteric training and some of my other presentations, they have been very much indications. There have been indications about the macrocosmic path, but mostly I keep coming back to the microcosmic path. So if you find yourself like resonating with Ari's invitation to the macrocosmic path, but you feel this hold, like somehow that's not quite it, and you're not sure why, you might consider asking your guardian angel or your spirit team the question of whether the reason it's just a little bit off is because you're being invited to the microcosmic path. And we'll be, I and Wise Cosmos will be offering more of that kind of thing in the future. Next, you might be thinking, well, what about those of us who are in the Southern Hemisphere? What about the Southern macrocosmic path? And I'd like to just share, just again, that in my experience working with the Northern path, one of the things Ari mentioned is that you get to a certain point, and he paused in his description in his last presentation and said, things open up. And he didn't say any more to that. There's many things that open up, but one of them in my experience, so just my experience, I don't know how universal this is yet, though I have suspicions, is I then, once I reached a certain point, on the northern macrocosmic path, I was immediately taken to the southern macrocosmic path. And so several years ago, I began doing work on the southern macrocosmic path. This is not something that Rudolf Steiner talked in detail about in the same way that Rudolf Steiner talked about the northern and even more specific Nordic macrocosmic path. But there is such a thing. I'm on it and have been working with it. Well, then somebody might say, well, okay, there's the northern and there's the southern, but what about like the Asian, what about that? And very interestingly, the last thing I want to end with is after making a certain amount of progress on the southern path, I just very naturally was led in a particular situation at a moment in world history to participate and to make connection with the Asian macrocosmic path, at least on the Pacific Rim side of Asia. And so the point being, when we talk about the macrocosmic path, it is not limited to a particular region. That's ultimately the entire point I'm trying to make here. Besides encouraging you to see if you're called to work with Ari, is to let you know that if you're in the South or you're in Asia or you're not Swedish, or Scandinavian or something, you can profitably work with Ari or Rudolf Steiner or any number of other wise and truthful teachers, wherever you are located on any of these paths, macrocosmic or microcosmic, and the spiritual world will guide you in the unique aspects that fit you for where you're at and what your destiny is. And Ari basically said something like that as well. And I just wanted to highlight it. Okay. Lastly, and much more briefly, I want to highlight what Mary Stuart Adams offered yesterday here for the Chicago branch Holy Nights, focused particularly on Mercury and Venus over the last 100 years. And as she has been doing for the last year and more, she has been also giving us foreshadowings of what's coming into the future, both in her public presentations as well as her writings. And Mary is another example of an authentic spiritual teacher who is part of this next generation, like Ari, with courage starting to step forth and offer what has been developed within him. Mary, likewise, is progressively, as many of you know, has picked up that courage and has been developing amazing skills to communicate on the astrosophical path. She is an example of a next generation that I and Brian Gray and many others have been praying for and have been looking for. And just a little biographical note for me, when I came into anthroposophy back in 2006, one of the very first things that I felt drawn to and really in some ways called to was astrosophy, specifically because I was aware that we had great astrosophy researchers such as Brian and David Tressimer and Robert Shipakasi and Robert Powell and others, some who are still with us and some who are not. But there wasn't sort of this next generation that I saw. And I volunteered to the spiritual world and said, I'll come do that. And I was just told, nope, it's not my job. It's going to be somebody else's. So I've been waiting for 16 years to begin to see who was going to be that next generation. And since Mary is somebody who is known to you, I just want to highlight her to say she's one of these people that I and many of us have been waiting for. And so again, if you missed her presentation, not only her last one, but any number of them that you can get online, many at Chicago branch, I highly recommend them to you. And just as I did with Ari, I recommend that you, if you check to see if this is part of one of the threads or one of the paths for you to be walking, because Rudolf Steiner also indicated we need more and more people who are going to be actively engaging the astrosophical path in the 21st century in order that there not be dire consequences to humanity as a whole. And we're the ones in particular that can receive that challenge and call and plea from Rudolf Steiner in a way that many others are not going to be able to receive it. All right, that is what I wanted to say as a connection to the past. And with that, I am ready to hand it over to Alison.
Thank you, Leland. So I wanted to bring us to this threshold of our presentation this evening, this morning, wherever you are in the world, and realize that we are now in the midst of this, the Holy Nights, this special portal of time and this special time of the year, and that we are at the intersection between the spiritual world and the world of nature, and each day begins and ends at sunset. And this is an ancient knowledge that we're just wanting to bring forth, and so our presentation is focused on what is known as the hidden Holy Night. And so this begins, this hidden Holy Night begins at sunset on December the 31st. So Leland is speaking from the United States, where it is currently December 30th. And I'm speaking from New Zealand, where it is already December 31st. And so within this space-time of nature and cosmos, Leland's hidden Holy Night won't begin until 4:45 p.m. sunset tomorrow, which is a bit less than 29 hours from now. The hidden Holy Night begins just before 8:45 tonight. It's at sunset, which is a little less than 12 hours from now. And so what we'll be offering during this presentation is at one level a preparation for the Holy Night. But on another level during this presentation, we'll be guiding you to the threshold that is outside of space and time. Across the threshold, we could engage in the hidden Holy Night of 2022, even though it hasn't yet begun inside this space-time. However, instead, what we're going to specifically invite you to do is to engage the hidden Holy Night of 100 years ago, 1922. And even more specifically, we're going to guide you to the hidden Holy Night of 1922 in Dornach, Switzerland, to the burning of and destruction of the first Goetheanum. Would you continue, please?
Thank you. Rudolf Steiner, in a series of lectures entitled The Fifth Gospel, was able to discuss aspects of the life of Jesus Christ not recorded in the four Gospels of the conventional Christian Bible. He did this through clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient, claircognizant perception of the Akashic record, which is the cosmic memory of all human events, actions, and thoughts. Steiner applied those same methods to many other questions, both ancient and future. in many other lectures and books, Rudolf Steiner taught us how to develop our inherent capacity as human beings to do the same thing. In fact, the fact is, every human being already accesses the Akashic record. It's just that most of the time it's unconscious. And we call our process of gaining the Akashic information or receiving the Akashic information, we call it by other names, give it other descriptions. We just don't know that's what we're actually doing. So what Alison and I will be doing today is gently and repeatedly guiding you to places where you will be able to enter into some of the scenes encompassing the hidden holy night burning of the first Goetheanum of 100 years ago. We will guide you to various portals, but it will always remain your choice which thresholds you want to cross, which Akashic records you want to access. So if I would use this imagination, Alison and I are not coming here today as teachers. Really, what we're coming here is more like tour guides. And we're going to be walking together. Alison and I are going to be walking together, and we invite you to walk together with us through an abbreviated chronology of the hidden holy night of 100 years ago, and a little bit into the holy day that follows. We're going to invite you to join us on our tour, and we're going to pause at certain points and point things out and explicitly stop talking and invite those of you in our tour group to pay attention to what's in front of you, to go out and explore what you see and hear and feel, and pay attention to what's arising in your will. Pay attention to what's arising in your thoughts. Pay attention to what you notice in your feeling life. But even in between those places that we formally stop and invite you to engage in a particular way, we'll invite particular things, but you can go do something else. And also in between those pause places, we have consciously crafted the narrative that comes to offer some imaginations and indications and possibilities for you to wander off on your own, as it were. In other words, you don't have to necessarily stay with the tour group. You don't necessarily have to stay with Alison and I as your guides. If along the way, something arises for you, or something glitters or glimmers or gets your attention, feel free to go off and explore that. Follow the Spirit, because the Spirit ultimately is the guide for each of us. Anytime, but all the more on the hidden holy night. Alison?
Thank you, Leland. So this special night, this hidden holy night, and this sacred anniversary and space of celebration as well, we just want to prepare this space. So I want to invite you just to an exercise to be present in the space. Take a deep breath and just leave the outside world aside if you have not already. And to connect always through our heart, connect downwards to the earth through our legs. Feel that heart force streaming downwards through our feet into the earth below. And at the same time, while still holding the earth, let that light from our hearts stream upwards to the heavens and stars above us. And we can feel ourselves in this pillar of light connected. Cosmos and the earth and each other. And so now Leland and I will just use a small portion of text in the Christian community to engage with. And Leland, if you could just pin yourself, please.
I believe people can see me now.
Great.
So we invite you to join us in this brief invocation. Christ in you.
And may he fill your spirit. Christ in you.
And may he fill your spirit. Well, everyone, as your tour guide, I invite you to gather around. In your holy imagination, begin to cast yourself back 100 years ago. It is December 31st, 1922, at 4:47 p.m. in Dornach. The Goetheanum is set on a hill, and at 4:47, the sun set. The hidden holy night begins. 5 days or 6 days earlier, depending on which time zone you're in as you hear this, 100 years ago and 5 or 6 days ago, at Christmas 1922, Rudolf Steiner gave Marie Steiner the following verse. The stars once spoke to the human being. It is world destiny that they are silent now. To be aware of this silence can become pain for earthly humanity. But in the deepening silence, there grows and ripens what human beings speak to the stars. To be aware of this speaking can become strength for spirit humanity. As the sun set, the planets and stars began to appear in the twilight, the silence of the stars as a daily reality could be experienced. Now, there's something about the silence of the stars at this stage in human development. Throughout the nature cycles of the year and the Christian festival cycle, there are times when the stars are less silent than usual, and also periods when the stars are more silent than typical. Yesterday, Mary Stuart Adams spoke here about one such time when the stars speak louder, specifically in connection with the moon nodes. That's an example of the spiritual world communicating in synchronicity with astronomical cycles. That's why we so very much encourage you to take up study with Mary and Brian Gray and David Tressimer and Robert Shipacassi and Robert Powell and others. They assist us in coming into contact, into relationship, into communication with the spiritual world. And so even though this is a period when the stars, in comparison to the past, are silent and this can become pain. It's not that they never communicate. However, during the nature and festival cycle of the year, as opposed to the astronomical cycles, which operate on a grander scale, during the nature and festival cycle of the year, the holy nights are the time of the year when the stars are most silent. This is information that has been shared by a number of anthroposophists, and I have some presentations on this in my Guidance in Esoteric Training series, which anyone can find on wisecosmos.org. So it is during the holy nights that the stars are the most silent in the calendar year, except for one night, the hidden holy night, the night that began in Dornoch 100 years ago at 4:47 p.m. At that moment in space-time, the stars became available to speak to every individual human being a unique personal message. But would anyone be listening? We get so used to not hearing from the stars, especially if we haven't yet developed a relationship with the stars. We get so used to not hearing that we stop listening. But the hidden holy night is the one night of the year when every human being can know with certainty that the spiritual world through the stars wishes to speak to you. So what I would like to invite us to do as a first exercise is to pause and to put ourselves again in holy imagination, take ourselves to the hill of Dornoch on which stands the first Goetheanum. Stands, we're going back 100 years, it stands. The sun is setting. The events that are going to take place in the Goetheanum, the preparations are taking place, festivities and activities are for the public are about to begin. But we can pause, perhaps with some others, and notice the sunset. Look up in the twilight and see what stars and planets might already be visible. And knowing that it is the hidden holy night and that we are at ground center for the soul of the physical manifestation of the soul of anthroposophy, the Anthroposophical Society in Dornoch, we can take this moment to open ourselves up to what the stars might already begin to whisper, to speak, or perhaps even to shout now that they have our attention to us. So we'll just be quiet for a moment and give you some time to put yourself there and to listen to the stars. And you can also speak to them. Let them, they ultimately want a conversation with you, with each of us.
Leland, you need to unmute.
Thank you. I invite you to come back for those who are ready and interested, but you can also stay there or follow whatever is before you. But to open it up now for a moment of general discussion, an opportunity to share what was that like for you to have this kind of invitation? What happened in your physiology? Did you feel something? Did you experience something? Did you see something? Did you hear something? We don't necessarily need to take a lot of time to share the personal details, but it's an opportunity for us to share, to come together as a group here and share, yeah, I experienced this, or no, I didn't. And so anything that you would like to share, we'll just open it up to everyone right now.
I will say that I heard the stars say to be prepared, that a fire was coming, and that I would personally be tested myself as to, I mean, I got the sense that I was there. I don't know if I was there in the physical, but that my commitment to Sophia, to Anthroposophia, was on the line. And that this was the moment for me to take a stand. And then I also saw that turning point in the relationship between Ita Wegman and Rudolf Steiner. And there were other things, but that's the principal message that I got.
This meeting is being recorded. This meeting is being recorded.
Barry, go ahead if you'd like to share something. Okay, not hearing Barry. Anybody else that would like to share? Go ahead and unmute yourself one at a time, and then when you're done, you can just mute yourself again.
Oh, let's see. I'll stop video. Leland Cynthia over here.
Hi.
Hi, nice to see you. I just had this overwhelming sense of sadness, which is usually what happens to me when I think about the burning of the Goetheanum. So, and I thought I had transformed some of that, but I don't think so. I think it's still there for me. And when I first heard about it, and I was new to anthroposophy and I didn't know much, but all I could do was weep and cry for quite a while. So, so there's still some of that somehow that I don't get to see it and walk in it and really experience the whole experience and see a mystery drama and see the representative of man in the center where it was supposed to be and the whole glorious artistic spiritual experience. So I'm still working with that and trying to transform some of that sadness, even though it's 100 years later.
Oh, Cynthia and Deborah, earlier what you shared, those are, thank you so much. And those are both, I don't want to, as we go through, Alison and I are not planning on commenting much. We can have our own thoughts and things that we might say or share, but this is more a period of just sharing what we're experiencing and not for us to comment. But we'll see what happens as we continue on this guided tour together now. and on into the future. So thank you for those two sharings. Anyone else? Alison, how about you? Is there anything you'd like to share? Or was somebody else about to speak? I'll be quiet if there was somebody else.
So I just wanted to share. Well, I was kind of in between being outside the Goetheanum, looking at the sunset, to being inside the Goetheanum, waiting to see the Eurythmy performance and to hear Steiner speak. So there was actually for me a pull between the microcosm and the macrocosm, you could say. Yeah. So just to continue on, we're at this stage now where the sun has. So we're just going back to that time before the sun is set, where it's around sort of 5 to 7 p.m. where the fire actually started. And on one occasion, there were reports that were more precise, stating that it was around 5:15. So this was a time actually where it was not known to the people in the Goetheanum. They were still involved in their celebrations for New Year's Eve, and there was a presentation, a Eurythmy performance with the prologue for Faust, and then Steiner gave a lecture. So Leland, perhaps you want to tell us a little bit about this lecture that he gave on that Holy Night.
Sure, thank you. After the Eurythmy presentation, Rudolf Steiner began his last lecture in the first Goetheanum. Though at that point, it's not even quite clear if Rudolf Steiner knew that right at the moment that he began the lecture. The fire that destroyed the first Goetheanum was discovered 1 hour after Rudolf Steiner finished this lecture. As we read the transcript of Rudolf Steiner's final lecture within the first Goetheanum, as we hear his words echoing in our own ears, we must pay attention with knowledge that those present in the lecture hall 100 years ago did not have. We have knowledge, most of them did not. Many people 100 years ago knew that when Rudolf Steiner lectured, he did so from the threshold between the material world and the spiritual world. His lectures were literally clairvoyant spiritual research, conducted in real time in front of a live audience. As anyone who's developed this capacity will affirm, spiritual teachers operating in this fashion perceive and receive much more information than they can appropriately share in the moment. Such teachers must constantly be exercising moral intuition, moral imagination, and particularly moral technique. In other words, true spiritual teachers are constantly discerning what to share, when to share, and how to share it. Not only that, they are constantly translating what they discover and receive from the spiritual world as specific messages for those who are present. They get all this information and they have to translate it and package it, as it were, for those that are in front of them in that moment. Teachers such as Rudolf Steiner also are able to carry in mind future readers or listeners of what they share. And it was in this clairvoyant state of communion with the spiritual world that Rudolf Steiner became aware that the Goetheanum was burning while he was lecturing. When he became aware of this, as it has been, this is part of the oral tradition that has been passed down from initiate to initiate, he had the decision about what to do with that information. And the full description of what happened, I don't have time to share right now. What I want to focus on is something that we can actually relate to. And that is when we are given information that that naturally evokes in us a response to do something, especially if the outward manifestation of the information that we have indicates some kind of catastrophe. And it can be the absolute appropriate response to want to avoid that catastrophe or to mitigate it. And the testimony that we have from the initiates is that Rudolf Steiner experienced that while he was lecturing. He became aware that the Goetheanum was burning. He had a natural impulse to want to do something about that. But immediately, as a student of the Spirit and as an initiate, stayed with his moral functioning, which he has taught us about. He, in that moment, went through the moral steps and came to the conclusion, because it was a free will choice, he came to the decision to not act on that information, because to do so would ultimately have been more detrimental to himself, to the Anthroposophical Society, and ultimately to humanity as well, if he had acted on that. So now, with that understanding, we can enter back into his lecture and carry that awareness with us. And something begins to shift for us as we listen to Rudolf Steiner, who, for us who are here present as part of this presentation or on the recording, we already, most of us, have a certain degree of deference to Rudolf Steiner as a master, as a spiritual master and a master teacher. And it's easy to think of him, perhaps too easy to think of him as a high and lofty initiate who's on some quantitative and qualitative levels much higher than us or much further than us. And yet in that moment, the testimony from the initiates is that Rudolf Steiner felt just like we did. If you want another comparison, we can go to the Bible. Just like Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, in his humanity, Jesus was faced with the choice about whether to move forward towards the cross and destruction or not. And he had the free will choice what to do. Jesus had that. Rudolf Steiner had that. You and I have those in our biography as well. All right, so with the decision made within Rudolf Steiner's soul, not to say anything, not to sound the alarm, and again, I'm leaving aside, reasons. This can be part of your own spiritual research to enter into that. There are places to find this kind of information and to work with it. With the decision made, Rudolf Steiner continued his lecture. Now, at least some of the people who were present for the lecture were aware of a particularly pregnant pause that occurred in the middle of the lecture. Now, pregnant pauses were not unusual because even Rudolf Steiner at times needed some duration in this space-time continuum to sort out and make decisions regarding what he was experiencing from across the threshold outside space and time. It was only later that some of those present realized that it was very possible that during one of those pregnant pauses, the one that was most notable, it could have been then that Rudolf Steiner became aware of the fire, faced the moral choice, and chose what we now can affirm was the correct path, the path of sacrifice. And the path specifically, there's more than one path of sacrifice, and there's one in particular that is known as the death of a vision. With this in mind, we can now enter into Rudolf Steiner's words with something other than an abstract or concept-focused attention to what he's saying. We can put ourselves into the auditorium 100 years ago with something more present to us than the average person in the auditorium. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus said to his disciples, "Can't you stay awake with me in prayer as I face my moral decision?" But the disciples were not capable of remaining in a clairvoyant state as witnesses and in support of the tremendous decisions facing Christ. Right now, we, Alison and I, want to offer you the opportunity to wake up into your clairvoyance, your clairaudience, your clairsentience, your claircognizance. You're invited to utilize your holy imagination to place yourself into the auditorium of 100 years ago, to not only listen to Rudolf Steiner's words, but to witness what was taking place within Rudolf Steiner's body, soul, and spirit as he spoke those words. As a spiritual witness, you can join those in the auditorium who were here with Rudolf Steiner, live and in person. I'm going to give you just a moment to center in, place yourself imaginatively, and with whatever other skills you've developed, into the auditorium, and I'm going to read a portion of what Rudolf Steiner spoke. The title of his lecture was part of a series entitled Man and the World of Stars, the Spiritual Communion of Mankind. Specifically, this was lecture 5. Spiritual knowledge is true communion, the beginning of a cosmic cultus suitable for human beings of the present age. And as we move towards the end of his lecture, he said, and to the very end, then he said this: what would otherwise be mere abstract knowledge achieves a relationship of will and feeling to the world. The world becomes the temple, the house of God. When man, as knowing man, summons up also powers of will and feeling, he becomes a sacrificing being. His fundamental relationship to the world rises from knowledge into cosmic ritual. The first beginning of what must come to pass if anthroposophy is to fulfill its mission in the world is that man's whole relationship to the world must be recognized to be one of cosmic ritual or cultus. I appointed this lecture for this particular day with a special end in view. For today, when that being of time, which is given in the cycle of the year, excuse me, this is Leland now, that is to say, when that being of time, which is given to us in the hidden holy night during the cycle of the year, okay, when that being is brought before our souls, when this year, 1922, for all outward perception and experience comes to an end, we should realize the nature of our relationship with time, how it rests with us out of the past to form and shape the future. to work actively for the future in order to create in the Spirit. As this year touches the past, so does it also touch the future. And today it is man's first obligation to grasp this future, to reflect that the budding and sprouting life in the external world contains within it the seeds of death, and that we must seek for life with our own power of action. Every new year is a symbol of this truth. If we see on the one hand the graves, let us behold on the other hand self-renewing life, waiting to receive the seed of the future into itself. It is our great task of this day to observe how the world around us, it is New Year's Eve. All is passing and disappearing and dying away. But how in the hearts of men who are conscious of their real humanity, of their divine humanity, there must be in us the mood of New Year, the mood of the beginning of a new era, of the uprising of a new life. Let us not merely turn with a superficial festiveness from a symbolic New Year's Eve to a symbolic New Year's Day, but let us so turn our thoughts that they may indeed grow powerful and creative as evolution requires them to be. Let us turn our thoughts away from the dying phenomena which confront us everywhere in modern civilization, like old graves, away from New Year's Eve to New Year's Day, to the day of the cosmic New Year. But that day will never dawn till man himself decides to bring it to pass. And Rudolf Steiner closed with this verse. In earth activity draws near to me, given to me in substance imaged form, the heavenly being of the stars. In willing, I see them transformed with love. In watery life stream into me, forming me through with power of substance force. In heavenly deeds of the stars, in feeling, I see them transformed with wisdom. It is now 9:00 p.m. This is when Rudolf Steiner spoke his last words inside the lecture hall. I'm going to invite us to listen to one more small portion of them again from a different English translation. And then I'll be quiet for a few minutes to allow you to continue to be present in the auditorium 100 years ago with these words echoing off the walls. Rudolf Steiner said, "What at any other time would be abstract knowledge becomes a relation of the feelings and the will with the world. The world thus becomes the house of God. The human being of perception becomes the sacrifice. It is our great task this day to observe how in the world around us it is New Year's Eve. All is passing and disappearing and dying away, all. But how in the hearts of human beings who who are conscious of their real humanity, of their divine humanity, there must be the mood of New Year, the mood of the beginning of a new era, of the uprising of new life.
Thank you, Leland. So we imagine ourselves in the Goetheanum, just having listened to that lecture and hearing those words, and it must have been a full house. It makes me wonder, how long did people stay and let those words resonate, which he spoke at 9 o'clock, but it was around about 45 minutes for people to finish leaving the Goetheanum. They would have been wrapping themselves up in coats because it was not quite, it was just above freezing outside, so cold. Exiting through those beautiful big doors and going down the stairs into the foyer, catching up with friends, and then exiting the building. And so it was around about 9:45 when the last audience members departed the lecture hall. And witnesses, thinking back to that night, remembered something unusual. Frederick Rittelmeyer and others have described how it was most characteristic of Rudolf Steiner after a presentation to leave the public venue for a more private room in order to make himself available to individuals who had burning questions, and so he would work with them. However, on this night, for some reason, Steiner did not, as he usually did, leave the lecture hall. Instead, he lingered, participating in the general socialization of participants and gathering up their things and putting on their coats and scarves and hats and preparing for exiting the building into the temperatures, as I said, that were just hovering above, just above freezing. And Rudolf Steiner neither urged anyone to leave, and nor did he hold anyone back from departing. He simply waited until everyone had departed on their own accord. A little after 10 p.m, smoke was noticed in the so-called White Room on the 3rd floor. And this White Room is the space between the two cupolas of the Goetheanum and where the Eurythmists practiced, and sometimes used it as a changing room as well. And so Rudolf Steiner stated that 1 hour after the last word had been spoken, I would summoned to the fire at the Goetheanum. 1 hour after the last word. And it was exactly at that moment in evolution when the Goetheanum was ready to become the bearer of the renewal of spiritual life. Now, about an hour later, at about 11 p.m, as soon as people became more aware of the seriousness of the situation, there were calls for help dispatched to the surrounding villages and to the nearby city of Basel. And so the closest villages, Dornach and Arisheim, and cries of the Goetheanum in Dornach is on fire was the terrible alarm message that flew like wildfire amongst the villagers. I just want to remind us that Rudolf Steiner had this clairvoyant, clairaudient awareness of what was taking place. And when eyewitnesses report that it was approximately 11 when the seriousness of the situation became clear, the reporters are describing everyone present other than Rudolf Steiner. Because by then Steiner had known the seriousness of the situation for at least a couple of hours, maybe 3. However, he had made that moral decision that required him to remain silent, to not say or do anything that arose out of his own impulse, his own instinct, astrality, or ego. What courage that must have taken. Steiner could only wait for other people to ask questions, seek advice, or exercise their own free will forces. Let us again practice waking up into our clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, claircognizance. And you are invited to utilize this holy imagination and to place yourselves outside the burning Goetheanum, near Rudolf Steiner, who reportedly was watching from inside one of the builders' huts through the window at the fire, and to those of him who are coming and going. So what were these people feeling? How are you feeling? What thoughts are arising? What willing is arising? And what activity are you feeling pulled towards?
Now it is 11:30 p.m. The fire in the small dome at the top of the building was successfully extinguished. However, it was clear to Rudolf Steiner that the entire building was at risk of total destruction and could no longer be saved. Indeed, it was clear to everyone outside the Goetheanum that the domes seemed in danger of imminent collapse. Also, the reports from the interior were that the smoke was so thick under the domes that it was becoming humanly impossible to function within the auditorium. Steiner therefore ordered all firefighting teams to evacuate the interior of the building. From that point on, all firefighting efforts were engaged from the exterior. At around 11:45, the people of Dornach, the nearest village, were the first to arrive to help, having responded to the call that went out at around 11 o'clock. At midnight, the midnight bells of the surrounding villages sounded forth in solemn ringing to bring in the new year. As the midnight bells are sounding, the first citizens from the neighboring village of Alison began arriving to help. Eyewitnesses also report that it was just now at midnight that the large dome of the first Goetheanum collapsed. It's reported that when the double cupolas fell in, there shot up heavenwards a giant sheaf of fire, and a torrent of sparks threatened the whole neighborhood, so that the firefighters had to be sent out away from the Goetheanum and into the neighborhoods in every direction in order to prevent the spread of disaster. Many members of the Anthroposophical Society, as well as many of the people who had raced up the hill from the surrounding region to help, passed the entire New Year's night, the entire hidden holy night, at the fire of the Goetheanum. Others who had left received word and came back. There are descriptions of what took place during those hours from midnight to dawn that you'll be able to find yourself, of walking around, of standing still, being in conversation, of emotions. We'd like to do as the next exercise is to invite you into a sequence, a particular sequence of 12 invitations. We're going to invite you to enter into this period between midnight and sunrise 100 years ago. Rudolf Steiner taught us about the 12 senses and said that it is in coming into awareness and contact and developing our 12 physical senses, so sensory senses, that we are able to build them as a foundation into supersensory perception. Just as we perceive with our 12 senses in the sensory material world, they are the foundation for developing supersensory perception in the spiritual world. So what I'm going to do is, give for about 30 seconds apart or so, I'm going to read off each of the 12 senses in a particular order, one of the orders that Rudolf Steiner gave. And it's a particularly significant order for this particular exercise. So as I say each of the 12 senses that Rudolf Steiner gave us, I'm going to invite you to use this as a springboard to enter in your imagination, to bring your sensory capacities through imagination to the hidden holy night between midnight and dawn. Of course, you can go wherever you want, but that's the particular invitation. And then to bring the next sense online, and then the next sense, until we have all 12 senses consciously engaged. And as you bring the sort of material sense in imagination to that experience, they also become the springboard towards supersensory perception. Here we go. The sense of taste. Imaginations tinged with materiality. Taste. Imaginations tinged with materiality. sight, pure imaginations, sight, imaginations. The sense of warmth, imaginations tinged with soul effects, sensing warmth, imaginations tinged with soul effects. Hearing, which are inspirations, the sense of hearing transformed into the perception of inspirations. The sense of word or speech, inspirations tinged with inward experience, the sense of word, speech, inspirations tinged with inward experience. The sense of thought, intuitions, thought, spirit, intuition. The sense of ego, intuitions tinged with essential being, the sense of our ego or our I, intuitions tinged with essential being. the sense of life, the feeling of comfort, regardless of circumstance, the sense of life, the feeling of comfort, regardless of circumstance. Movement, experience of the freedom of soul, the sense of movement, experience of the freedom of soul. Balance, inner rest, feeling oneself as spirit, the sense of balance, inner rest, feeling oneself as spirit. Touch, permeation by feeling of God, the sense of touch, permeation by feeling of God. Smell, mystic union with God, the sense of smell, standing outside the Goetheanum 100 years ago, mystic union with God. We invite you, if you're ready, to begin coming back to the group, And we'll open it up for sharing. Just unmute yourself and go ahead.
Leland, you really took us through this. I mean, I could taste the fire, I could smell the fire, I could feel the warmth. I mean, it was so powerful what you brought to us. I don't know what to say, except that the overall feeling is not a bad resignation, but sort of a resignation, like, you know, we're following Steiner, and Steiner says, you got to get back. It's too late, you know, and then just watching it. And someone said, this is an addition, but someone said last week that the columns look like huge candles on fire. I mean, that vision, that image is just sticks with me always now, you know, and I just really appreciate this contemplation. You both did a lot of work, and I mean, I'm very sad, but it's very powerful. Thank you.
So I was led deeply into the imagination of sight with what you presented, Leland, and the sight now, if we can think of ourselves at around 8:18 in the morning of the sunrise at Dornach, and the sight that physically meets us, as well as clairvoyantly meets us as the sun rose, as the sun rises every day, no matter what the events are happening. And so this hidden holy night becomes this hidden holy day. And witnesses state that later on that New Year's Day, that the sky was veiled in clouds, as if to check the great outpouring of people which had taken place from Basel and the neighbourhood around Dornach. And the whole population, within them was this urge, this one urge, off to Dornach. And so hour after hour, unbroken streams of people climbed up the hill, climbed these muddy roads and these slippery fields, and whilst other streams, equally unbroken, were flowing back down again away from the Goetheanum. Continuous stream of people. And Rudolf Steiner later referred to the pain for which there is no words. However, on the day, as Albert Steffen relates, Rudolf Steiner kept his nerve and declared the continuance of the New Year's program. In the morning, Dr. Steiner was still there, and we will go on with our lectures as notified. And no time is to be spared, he said. And he gave instructions that the pools of water in the shrinery, which was the temporary shed, the carpentry house that was used for lecturers, that all the dirt that had been carried in by muddied shoes be removed. So just as the night before had been a hive activity, so was the following day, continuous activity. Now, as we continue on through this chronology of events, we're about 10 days later. And in parts, thanks to snow that had fallen on the ground, the ashes had been cooled, and people were able to enter the remains, the ruins, and clear away the unburned debris. And so investigation into the cause of the fire continued for some time, and the Goetheanum was appropriately insured, which we can be grateful for. And the insurance company conducted their own investigation. And so any proof of contributory negligence would have been voided or severely prejudiced the insurance claim if something had been known to cause the fire, but no such proof was ever discovered. So the timely payout of the insurance facilitated the building of the second Goetheanum, the one that we know today. So now moving forward through the year, past these holy nights, past Christmas, past Epiphany, January, February, March, April. In Rudolf Steiner's notebook of April 1923, and a periodical as well, the periodical Anthroposophy, he was quick to advocate for this rebuild, but not out of wood. So Steiner researched and he guided experimentation in using steel, reinforced concrete as aesthetic building material. And so even to this day, in graduate schools of art and architecture, the Goetheanum is holding a place as one of the great innovations in modern architecture and art. Later in the year, Rudolf Steiner wrote to the central administration of the local Swiss canton, Solothurn, and said that the new building will stand directly on the site of the old, and was going to be made of concrete, and that we're convinced that this new construction will be able to meet all the requirements as to fire safety to an unusual degree. I just want to read this verse out of Steiner's notebook of 1923, where he talks about the Goetheanum, and it's called Made Out of Nature's Materials. Made out of nature's materials, the Goetheanum wanted to speak through its forms of the eternal to the eyes of the human being, of all human beings. The flames were able to consume the matter. Henceforth, Anthroposophia, her edifice formed of the spirit, shall speak to the inner soul of the human being in words of fire tempered by the flames of the spirit.
Rudolf Steiner wrote that verse in April of 1923. Now we'll skip forward to December 31st, 1923, the 1-year anniversary of the burning of the first Goetheanum. Exactly a year on from the fire, Rudolf Steiner reflected on the events of New Year's Eve, 1922 at the Goetheanum. In a presentation, he said to the people gathered that the memory of a year ago was painful. But at this point, he was already referring to it as the old Goetheanum. Remembering that night, Rudolf Steiner reminded his listeners that, quote, the flames burst from our beloved Goetheanum, but out of the very pain, we pledge ourselves to remain loyal to the spirit to which we erected the Goetheanum, building it up through 10 years of work. We hear in that acknowledgement of pain, and yet the kind of equanimity that fully embraces the pain and then takes it to the other side, the dynamic balance of equanimity, of feeling all the way to one side and then feeling all the way to the other side and bringing in the exhortation. And in those words that he said, we pledge ourselves to remain loyal to the spirit to which we erected the Goetheanum, building it up through 10 years of work. We hear in this reference to the spirit what Alison shared from his notebook of April. Henceforward, Anthroposophia, her edifice formed of spirit. In other words, the edifice of Anthroposophia is not the Goetheanum. It is not physical. Henceforward, Anthroposophia, her edifice formed of the spirit, shall speak to the inner soul of the human being in words of fire, tempered by the flames. What does that mean? Flames of the spirit. So the words of fire resounding to those present 100 years earlier, physical flames were tempered for Rudolf Steiner by the flames of the spirit. We hear in these kinds of words the echo of what went on inside of Rudolf Steiner, the moment that he became aware that the Goetheanum was on fire. And as he lived through the entire experience with everyone else and throughout the whole year, and he never apparently lost connection with the realities, the simultaneous realities of the material world, the natural world, and the spiritual world. And he didn't see only one without seeing the other. Behind the physical, he always sought to perceive with all 12 senses the spirit. So Rudolf Steiner, on the 1-year anniversary, urged his audience to move on from the, quote, tragedy, and offered them the recipe for doing just that. He said, quote, we are able to change the pain and grief into the impulses to action. And then we shall also change the sorrowful event itself into a blessing. The pain cannot thereby be made less. This is no false equanimity. This is Leland talking. There's no false equanimity. Back to Steiner. The pain cannot thereby be made less. but it rests with us to find in the pain the urge to action. Let us carry over the soul of the Goetheanum into the cosmic new year. Let's erect in the new Goetheanum a worthy memorial to the old. We heard earlier in our group discussion some evidences of discussions of people who to this day are feeling the loss, the tragedy, the pain, and continuing to experience that in depths of soul. Rudolf Steiner says here repeatedly, that's good. That's okay. You're connected. You're engaged. You're alive. Your soul is functioning as it should. You feel it. But then the continuing encouragement to not get lost in that, but to pair it with an awareness of what the Spirit was doing. Why, and perhaps working to discover why the Spirit chose that moment. Not just, as Rudolf Steiner repeatedly said, on the night of the burning, and repeated a year later, that it was not just any old New Year's Eve heading into a New Year's Day, but that it was the transition moment, that the Goetheanum at that moment and on that night became fully alive. And at the moment of becoming fully alive, became the burnt offering. Of all the types of offerings in the old sacrificial system, the highest was the burnt offering of the perfect, unblemished, pure, and up to the moment of sacrifice, fully living aspect. If it's externalized, of another being, if it's internalized, some aspect of living aspect of our own being. And at the moment of coming fully alive, the Spirit said to Rudolf Steiner and to all of us, still to this day, will you follow in the story of Jacob in the Old Testament and be willing to sacrifice your son, your living son? Are you that committed to the call of the Spirit? Can you trust yourself to hear the Spirit, to see the Spirit, to join the Spirit, to trust the Spirit, even when it doesn't make sense? Can you trust yourself? Can you trust the Spirit? We live in a long lineage of people called to make these kinds of sacrifices. It is part of the spiritual journey. Rudolf Steiner knew it and spoke those words that night, reflecting the lineage of that reality as he himself was going through it and trying, without giving anything away, trying to prepare those who were present. A year later, he repeated the same message to us. And now 100 years later, we can receive the same message. Yes, feel it. Yes, know the significance of it. Yes, know that something living was not taken away from us. It could have been experienced as just a taking away, a robbery, but it wasn't. If we enter into what was behind the flames, tempered behind the fire, tempered by the flames of Spirit, we see the reality that it was a spiritual sacrifice. And out of the willingness to make these sacrifices, just as Jacob came, just as the angel of the Lord came to Jacob, and in that moment, in that instance, replaced Jacob with a different creature to be sacrificed. Or in the case of Jesus, no, it was to sacrifice his physical manifestation as a burnt offering, so to speak. In this case, it was crucifixion, just as fiery in pain. Or now the burning of the Goetheanum, to sacrifice the outward physical and to turn it into a spiritual act, a spiritual sacrifice, which ultimately, if we're able to get there, the sacrifice becomes the gift. And just as the angel of the Lord provided Jacob with something new as a replacement, Jesus, his body was replaced with a new body, and the Goetheanum was replaced with the Anthroposophical Society was gifted with a new sheath, the second Goetheanum. And with all these stories, we can find even in our own biographies, these moments. So we'll just give you just a few minutes to pause and reflect on this invitation resounding forth from 100 years ago, 99 years ago, 2,000 years ago, and even longer. We are in that lineage of sacrifice that becomes the dawning of the new cosmic age of humanity. Alison, any last thoughts or comments or invitations?
Mhm. I think my thoughts and feelings might remain hidden for a bit longer. Jean has his hand up. Can you unmute, Jean? There you go.
The host, there we go. Thank you very much. I really appreciated this. I just wanted to say that I posted into the chat a book that I've just completed based on the what happened in anthroposophy in America over the last century since the burning of the Goetheanum. And there is a website, a site you can take a look to find out about the book. It'll be published January 15th. But I just wanted to say that this lineage of actually doing work is absolutely true. What the anthroposophy in America accomplished is pretty significant. And so I just draw your attention to that post that's in the chat. Thank you so much, Leland. Thank you so much, Alison.
Well, and thank you, Jean, for your book. I was looking for an opportunity to mention, and since you spoke up, it's perfect to let you know that Alison and I both had access to at least excerpts of your book, Fireborn, and we consulted that as part of our own preparation. And so thank you for it, and thank you for mentioning it. And we certainly benefited from it ourselves and recommend it to all others. Anyone else? We have perhaps something less than 10 minutes remaining for any kind of free commenting or sharing or questions. I do see in the chat, there's a question, is this being recorded? I think perhaps by now you know that the answer is yes. And we will, the Chicago branch will be making this available generally within a few days. We also, Alison and I have also talked about the possibility of creating a sort of taking the raw footage here and adding in some additional things. We have all these resources that we couldn't bring within the time frame, but perhaps in the final video we could add some additional elements that could fit in to the video, as well as make available a number of resources that we found particularly helpful. There's so many resources that we found helpful. An article by John Paul, for example, Paul with 2 L's on the end. We mentioned Jean Yeager's work and so much else. I won't take time now to say more, but we'll probably, we're talking about putting together a bibliography that was of assistance to us and could be assistance to you as well. But at least, if nothing else, within a couple of days, you'll be able to, should be able to find it at Chicago branch.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Cynthia, you have your hand raised. Can you unmute yourself?
Okay, now I can. I just wanted to say thank you so much because it was very cathartic for me to actually have that experience of being led through the way you both did it. It was so beautifully done. And really, I just feel like, maybe I've cried my last over it and can move forward. And I know the gift that came out of it was the foundation stone meditation. And I had a dream once about the amazing importance of that and how if we pray it, if pure souls pray that meditation, Michael's sword can come to earth and put out the fire. That was the image. And then the words rang out, pray the foundation stone incessantly. And I went, oh my gosh, incessantly, that means never ceasing. How can I do that? So of course I had to memorize it first. And then I kept trying to work with it in this lemniscate. So before I went to sleep, I would pray it. And then I would try to continue that in my sleep. And it was a really incredible experience. And I just have to say, I thought it was a direct communication about how important this foundation stone is. And even if it seems like such a big thing to do, to do parts of it or whenever we can, to pray as incessantly as possible so Michael can work on earth and help us. So thank you. I'll focus more on that after we get through this evening and move on to the new dawn of the new year. Thank you.
Feel like you you both had the wings of angels behind you, sending you great winds to do the research you did and to share. And you know, I came as a, you know, thinking this was going to be another good offering, and they are all very good from Chicago and in general. But this was stupendous. This was deep and full of, you know, your love of the subject and to try to bring it out into the world. And it's really amazing. Thank you so much. And it would be wonderful if it could, like you said, work further and people could hear and experience some of your research. Thank you so very much.
Well, I want to thank you all for being here because, you know, we need participants, we need people to engage with. So, and to strive and work together with. And so, you know, thank you, and thank you for the Chicago branch for hosting us, and you know, for the other presenters as well who take the time to prepare and engage and offer us their work and their own perspectives and from their own paths of you know, struggles and discovery. So thanks.
Yes, thank you, Alison and Leland, so much for so generously sharing your research and this powerful presentation. It's been an amazing journey. And thank you everyone for joining us today. And
just lastly, I just wanted to say, I mean, just if we come back to the present, to the day, the 30th or the 31st, and where I am, and that just realize that we've got this hidden holy night that is dawning on us. And so wherever we are in the world, can we work through this holy night together, and see what comes out, what is no longer hidden, what speaks to us, what's waiting to be seen and heard. And may what surmise what has been, may what has been surmise what is to come.
Thank you, Alison. I realize I have one last thought too, and that is in the references I was making to the sacrifice. These are things that do come up in our lives, in our biographies, but there's also a pattern and a cycle to them that can be discovered in our biography. And if you're not aware of this, Rudolf Steiner calls it the Christ cycle. And Brian Gray did a tremendous lecture bringing Rudolf Steiner's understanding of the Christ cycle. Specifically, I made a particular reference to references to sacrificing as part of the spiritual path. And I mentioned one in particular which applied here, which is the death of a vision. There are other types of sacrifices that we could see taking place in the burning of the Goetheanum, but I chose to focus on that one, the death of a vision. And the death of a vision is an aspect in particular, one of the most common characteristics of the sacrifice that's required as we are on the Christ cycle of initiation, whether as conscious initiates or in the process of unconscious natural initiation. And I think it was here that I spoke about natural initiation in the past, but what I most want to refer you to is Brian Gray's recorded lecture at wisecosmos.org on the Easter Christ cycle, and you may find that beneficial to you in your ongoing research and work as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Leland and Alison. before we end, I'd like to just mention that if you're in the Chicago area, we will be starting Eurythmy at 4:30. We have been doing Eurythmy through the Holy Nights with Jan Rank, and the title is The Word on Fire. So last night we recreated the 14 pillars. We had 14 people, and each person had an opportunity to walk through amongst the pillars. And so there's many rich offerings happening during these holy nights, and I wish you well, everyone, on your journey through them, and hope you will join us again for our presentations here in Chicago. So thank you again, and I think I can unmute everybody here. I've been having some trouble here, so not sure. Okay, ask all to unmute. And if you'd like to say thank you, and then shortly we will end.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leland. Thank you, Alison.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chicago branch.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Leland.
Bye.
Bye-bye.